You know, my dear, I wasn't always an old granny with grey braids. Once upon a time I was a girl full of dreams, with sea-green eyes and a heart full of hope. I was only 16 when my father, a British diplomat, was assigned to a posting in the Far East, Japan. It was the early 1960s. The world was still healing from war, and everything felt touched by silence and hope. To me, Japan was more than just another country. It was another planet. I still remember stepping off the train that first day, the way the summer heat clung to the air, heavy with the scent of blooming wisteria and grilled fish from the market stalls. The streets were narrow and clean, lined with wooden houses with curved roofs and sliding doors. Every few feet, a bicycle bell rang or a child's laughter echoed from behind paper walls. People bowed as they passed, their politeness woven into every movement. There were no loud conversations, no hurried footsteps. Even the silence in Japan had a texture, soft and full like the spaces between falling raindrops. I felt like I had stepped into the pages of a storybook I had once read, a world written in delicate ink and gentle gestures. We moved into a traditional-style house just outside a quiet village near the sea. The house had a small wooden porch and a tea garden in the back, overgrown but peaceful, with stepping stones, a koi pond, and an old sakura tree that looked like it had witnessed lifetimes before mine. I spent my days exploring the garden, watching dragonflies dart over the water, listening to the slow, patient sounds of nature. But despite its beauty, everything felt foreign. The food was unfamiliar. The language, impossible. The loneliness crept in quietly, the way the evening mist rolled in from the ocean. My father was gone most of the time, busy with his diplomatic work. My mother had passed away when I was 10, and I'd grown used to solitude, but here, in a land where I couldn't even read the signs on the street, it felt different. I missed the grey skies of London, the clatter of double-decker buses, the smell of wet newspapers and tea biscuits. But I also knew deep down that this place was about to change everything. And I was right. It happened one late afternoon. I was sitting on the edge of the tea garden, sketching the crooked sakura tree in my notebook. The air was thick with the scent of pine and warm earth. That's when I heard voices, two of them, low, male voices, speaking Japanese. I turned my head slightly and saw them, a middle-aged man with streaks of grey in his hair and a younger boy beside him, carrying a wooden box. The man looked like an artist, with paint on his sleeves and a roll of canvas under his arm. And the boy was unlike anyone I had ever seen. He was maybe 17, just a year older than me. Tall for a Japanese boy, with a lean, graceful build, and thick black hair that fell just over his eyes. There was something effortlessly calm about him. His skin was sun-kissed, his fingers stained with ink. His eyes, deep brown, almost black, seemed to take in everything, quietly. They had come to help repair or restore something in the neighbor's house, I guessed. The man, his father, began setting up a scroll on a wooden easel while the boy wandered into our shared garden, looking around with mild curiosity. And then, it happened. I stood up too quickly. My sketchbook slipped from my hands, flew off the porch, and hit him squarely in the chest. He froze. I froze. For a second, we just stared at each other. And then, he picked up the notebook. He looked at the page, my awkward pencil sketch of the tree, then looked up at me. I panicked. Sorry. I blurted out, stepping forward. Then I realized he probably didn't understand me. He tilted his head, trying to follow my words. That's mine, I said, pointing. Notebook. Mine. I gestured awkwardly, tapping my chest, miming drawing, trying not to die of embarrassment. His lips curled into the faintest of smiles. He said something softly in Japanese. I had no idea what it was, but his voice was warm, calm. It made me feel a little less like I was on fire. Then, very gently, he handed the sketchbook back. Our fingers brushed, just barely, and I felt a strange little jolt in my stomach. The kind you get when you miss a step on the stairs. He bowed slightly, so I bowed too, clumsily and too deep, almost tipping forward. He tried to suppress a laugh. I turned and scurried back toward the porch, cheeks burning. But I couldn't help glancing back once. He was still there, now standing beside his father, but his gaze had shifted toward me again. That evening, I asked our neighbor about them. "Oh, the artist," she said. "Yes, that's Mr. Tanaka. He does calligraphy and traditional painting. His son's name is Haru. The girls in the village all whisper about him, tall, handsome, quiet. Never causes trouble. They say he'll be famous one day. Haru." The name stayed with me. I wrote it down that night in the corner of my notebook. I didn't know it then, but that awkward, wordless meeting in the garden, a dropped sketchbook, a shy smile, a brush of fingers, was the beginning of something I would carry in my heart forever. His name was Haru. Haru meaning spring in Japanese, and he was just that, a quiet, slow-blooming presence in my strange new world. He never spoke first. He didn't need to. After that first, awkward moment in the garden, the dropped sketchbook, the half-smile, the silent exchange, we started noticing each other more. Not by design, not on purpose. It was as if the world just kept nudging us into the same places. Sometimes I'd be walking along the narrow path behind the tea house, and he'd be there, sweeping fallen petals off the stone. Other times I'd sit sketching near the koi pond, and he'd appear beside his father, carrying brushes or folding silk. Always quiet. Always observant. We never made plans, never agreed to meet. But somehow, we kept finding each other. And soon, we began walking. At first, it was nothing more than a few hesitant steps shared in the same direction. I'd walk a few paces ahead. He'd slow down behind me. Neither of us spoke, not really. But something passed between us in glances, in half-smiles, in the way his shadow never fell far from mine. One morning, I was walking down to the shoreline with my sketchbook tucked under my arm. The tide was low, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed. I heard soft footsteps behind me, and there he was. No words. Just that same look, the quiet one, like he was reading me. I pointed to the path ahead and shrugged, half grinning. He nodded. And so, we walked. It became our rhythm. Most days after the sun had cooled, we'd set out down the winding paths through the village, past rice fields and sleepy wooden houses, to the rocky shore. He'd carry his own little notebook, full of kanji. Kanji are the Chinese characters used in the Japanese writing system. Each character has its own meaning and is often combined with others to form words. I couldn't read, and charcoal drawings of birds and boats. I showed him mine too, mostly trees, flowers, the corner of a house. We'd stop sometimes, lean over one another's shoulders, compare strokes, and laugh when a drawing went wrong. There were so many silences, but none of them felt empty. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Japanese. But somehow, that wasn't a barrier. It became part of the magic. We relied on gestures, faces, simple sounds. I'd point to something, a flower, a shape in the clouds, and he'd give it a name in Japanese. I'd try to repeat it, usually badly. He'd laugh softly, then correct me, slowly. I began to write them down. One word at a time, I started to understand the world through his eyes. He was always calm, patient in a way I had never known boys to be. There was something grounded about him. Something still. He never rushed, never spoke to fill the space. He just was. Fully, entirely. One evening, we sat side by side on a wide stone wall that overlooked the sea. The sky was blushing gold, and the wind tangled in my hair. He took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a sketch. A sakura tree, almost identical to the one in our shared garden. He'd drawn it from memory. The lines were simple but alive. Beneath it, he'd written something in English. Just one sentence. "I like when you smile." I looked at him, surprised, a little breathless. He wasn't looking at me, only at the horizon. But his hand brushed the edge of mine, and in that moment, something inside me softened completely. I wanted to say so much. I wanted to ask him what he dreamed about, what his favorite food was, what he thought about at night when the wind rustled the bamboo outside his window. But all I could do was press my fingers lightly against the sketch and whisper, "Thank you." And he understood. Over the days that followed, our walks became longer. We wandered through old temples and forests where the light fell like water through the leaves. We'd sit beside shrines, listening to the bells in the distance. He taught me how to fold tiny paper cranes. I taught him how to count to 10 in English. And slowly, That quiet closeness began to bloom into something more. I remember the first time he laughed loudly, not just a soft smile or a quiet chuckle, but a real, full laugh. I had tried to draw a fish from memory, and it came out looking more like a slipper with eyes. He couldn't help it, he burst out laughing, doubling over, tears at the corners of his eyes. I laughed too, though mostly out of relief. For a boy so still, his laughter was a bright, rare thing, and I felt lucky to have caused it. We were building a world, slowly, delicately, without needing to say so. Sometimes we would sit beneath the sakura tree in the garden and not speak at all. I'd draw. He'd carve something small into a piece of driftwood. Time passed gently there, like the sound of wind moving through paper lanterns. And when it rained, we shared an old oil paper umbrella. Our shoulders pressed close, heads ducked under the same curve of shelter, shoes squelching in the muddy path. Once, I slipped on a wet stone and nearly fell, but he caught my arm just in time. We looked at each other, faces inches apart, and I felt the whole world hush around us. No kiss. Not yet. Just the weight of the moment. Just the beginning of something neither of us dared name aloud. Every evening, when I returned home, I would write in my journal. Saw Haru again. We walked today. He showed me how to say sun. I didn't know then how precious these memories would become. How they would stay with me, pressed between the pages of my life, long after the summer was gone. One afternoon, as we walked through a quiet bamboo grove not far from the village, I found the courage to ask him his favorite color. I said it slowly, drawing the question in the air with my fingers. Color. You, favorite. He paused, smiled, then pointed to the sky between the bamboo leaves, where the late sun turned everything gold and soft green. Then he touched his shirt, a pale blue one he often wore. And finally, he pointed at me. I blinked. Me? I asked. He nodded, still smiling, then gestured toward the pink ribbon I always wore in my hair, a little piece of home, something my mother had given me when I was a child. It was the simplest exchange, but it made my heart flutter. He didn't just pick a color. He chose moments, memories, connections. Things that mattered. That was how he was. He never rushed an answer. He noticed things. He listened, not just with ears, but with his entire being. With his eyes, his posture, the way his hand would twitch slightly before he turned a page or offered me something. It felt safe. Like I could be completely silent and still be seen. We began exchanging little gifts, not bought things, but personal tokens. He once gave me a folded crane made from the back of a candy wrapper. Another time, he handed me a flat stone with a tiny blossom drawn on it in ink. I didn't know what to give in return, so I started sketching things for him, small, clumsy drawings of things we'd seen together. A wave crashing against the shore. The twisted roots of a pine tree. His hand, half-finished, ink-stained, resting on a sketchpad. I think he liked them. Once, I caught him tracing the lines of one with his finger long after I'd handed it to him. He thought I wasn't looking. But I was. There was a moment, one I'll never forget, when we sat under the sakura tree as the petals began to fall, brushing against our shoulders like pink snow. He reached up and gently plucked one from my hair. He didn't speak, didn't smile, he just looked at it, and then at me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then, he placed it carefully in my notebook, pressing it between the pages. Our hands touched again. Neither of us moved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my mind. Over and over. I remember writing in my journal. It feels like something is happening. Like something beautiful and impossible is blooming between us, wordless and fragile, but real. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know if he felt the same way, if he understood the strange swirl of feelings inside me. But I hoped he did. And then one day, as we sat on the hill overlooking the village, he turned to me and asked, carefully, slowly, "What is missing?" His accent was soft. The word a little broken. But I understood. I thought for a moment. Then I closed my eyes and pointed at my chest. He nodded, thinking. Then he pointed at his heart, too. And I realized, maybe he did understand. Maybe he had all along. We weren't just walking through gardens and drawing trees. We were filling something we didn't know was empty until the other person arrived. There are moments in life that don't need translation. Moments when a glance, a touch, or the way someone lingers a little longer than before says more than any sentence ever could. That's what it became, my time with Haru. A language without words. By early summer, we had fallen into a rhythm more intimate than anything I'd ever known. Our days were marked by shared sketching sessions in the shade of the garden wall, long walks by the sea, and quiet evenings when the world around us softened into dusk and shadow. He started learning English. I would bring a little notebook and point to things: sky, tree, flower, hand. He'd repeat them, carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration, then laugh when he got it wrong. I'd laugh too. Not to mock him, but because it was the kind of laughter that rises from joy, from being close to someone who makes even mistakes feel beautiful. In return, he showed me his Japan, not just the places, but the feeling of it. The stillness of a shrine at sunrise. The scent of tatami mats. Tatami mats are traditional Japanese floor mats made of woven straw, used in homes for sitting, sleeping, and walking, warmed by the sun. The way the waves bowed gently against the rocks when the wind blew from the east. He taught me to see, not with my eyes, but with my heart. Sometimes we'd sit in silence for hours, side by side on the shore, sketching what we saw, or just listening. To cicadas. To wind. To each other's breathing. I didn't need him to speak English fluently. I already understood him. It was during one of those walks, the kind where time stretches and folds like silk, that something shifted between us. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold and coral. We were walking along a narrow path lined with blooming sakura trees. Petals drifted around us like confetti from the sky. I stopped, turned toward him, and laughed as a petal landed right on the tip of his nose. He looked at me, truly looked, and reached up, brushing it away. But his hand lingered, just barely touching my cheek. Neither of us moved. I felt my heart thudding in my chest, not fast, not panicked. Just present. Heavy with something that had no name yet. Then, slowly, so slowly I could feel each second stretch between us, he leaned in. And I met him halfway. Our lips touched. Just barely. Like the softest question. It was not fireworks. It was not wild. It was quiet, like a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. Like the space between heartbeats. Like the moment before a wave breaks. It lasted only seconds. But when we pulled away, the world had changed. He smiled, shy, a little breathless. I smiled too, my cheeks warm, my whole body tingling with something I couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tracing the moment again and again. The tilt of his head. The weight of his hand. The taste of sakura and sea air. From then on, everything was different, but still delicate. We didn't rush. We still drew. Still walked. Still shared silences that meant more than words. But now, sometimes his fingers would brush mine as we walked. And I wouldn't pull away. Sometimes, as we sat together beneath the lanterns outside the tea house, he'd look at me just for a moment too long and I'd look back. And that was enough. One evening, he brought me a small silver pendant, delicate and smooth, shaped like a crane in mid-flight. Its wings outstretched, frozen in motion, like a moment that refused to pass. He placed it gently in my hand with both of his, bowing slightly, eyes soft. I held it close to my chest. Beautiful, I whispered. He looked at me. You, he said, his voice low, careful. Beautiful. It was one of the first full sentences he ever said in English. And I think it broke something open inside me. But even in the sweetness of those days, there was something else. A quiet truth that hovered around us like the mist over the sea. We both knew this wouldn't last. My father had begun to mention the end of his assignment. The word return had started to creep into dinner conversations. London. Home. Back. But this felt like home now. This boy with ink-stained hands. This language without words. This place where I had become someone new. Sometimes I think Haru knew before I did. He started giving me more drawings. Little ones. Sketches of places we'd been. Of the garden, the ocean, a tree we always passed. He never said why. But I understood. They were goodbyes in disguise. One evening, as we sat beneath the sakura tree where we'd shared our first kiss, I turned to him. "What will you do, when I go?" I asked, unsure if he'd understand. He looked down, thoughtful, and after a moment, said, slowly, "Remember." And I knew then, so would I. In every cherry blossom. In every soft footstep on a stone path. In every page of my sketchbook. Because some love stories don't need long years to grow deep. Some are written quickly, in bright colors and quiet touches. Ours was like that. A short season. A full heart. A language without words. That summer felt like it belonged to no one but us. The days stretched, golden and soft, wrapped in the hush of cicadas and the scent of sea wind. Every morning, I'd wake up with the same thought, will I see him today? And every evening, I'd go to sleep smiling, because the answer had been yes. We had become a rhythm, a quiet ritual, a whispered promise that neither of us dared to speak aloud. We'd meet in the early afternoons, when the sun was high and the shadows short. Sometimes we'd take our sketchbooks and walk through the village, drawing whatever caught our eye, a child chasing a dragonfly, an old woman hanging laundry, a stray cat asleep in a sunbeam. But more and more often, we forgot the drawings altogether. It was enough just to be. We'd wander down the winding coastal path, hands brushing, stealing glances. We'd pause beneath blooming trees or sit on smooth stones near the shore, the tide gently licking at our toes. There, he would sometimes tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I'd lean into his palm just slightly, as if to say, stay like this a little longer. One time, we lay in a field just beyond the village, surrounded by tall grass that whispered with the breeze. I remember the way his fingers traced lazy circles on the inside of my wrist, the way our legs were tangled without care. He leaned over me, his lips brushing mine, softer than breath. Again. And again. He never rushed. There was a reverence in the way he touched me, like he was memorizing me with his fingertips. His hands would rest on my waist, my shoulder, the hollow of my back. My heart would thrum like a drum, and sometimes I thought, this is love. It must be. I could feel how much he wanted me to feel safe. Seen. Desired, but never pressured. It was a dance. A tender ache. I don't know when exactly I started dreaming about staying. It began as a fleeting thought, like a daydream caught in sunlight. But the more time we spent together, the more real it became. I imagined finding some job teaching English, maybe, and renting a tiny room with paper walls and a futon. I imagined waking up to the smell of miso soup. To the sound of Haru's voice saying good morning in his careful English. To mornings where his hand would already be in mine. He told me once, one evening as we sat under the trees, if I could go with you, I would. His voice was quiet. Honest. Like a dream spoken aloud for the first time. But we both knew. It wasn't that easy. As July wore on, the air became thicker. Heavier. Not just with humidity, but with something else, something neither of us wanted to name. My father's mood shifted. His meetings increased. I overheard words like logistics, departure, weeks, not months. Even our perfect little world began to feel borrowed. But still, we clung to every moment we could. Our last night together, though we didn't know it yet, was during the village lantern festival. The streets were glowing with soft lights. Paper lanterns floated overhead like tiny moons, and the scent of grilled fish, sweet sake, and incense filled the air. Children ran past us in yukata, their laughter ringing like bells. Haru had made a paper lantern for me. On its side, he had drawn a crane, flying toward a sun. On the other, a tiny sakura blossom. When we released it into the water, I whispered a wish I didn't dare speak aloud. He took my hand as we stood watching it drift away. Then he turned to me. I don't want this to end, he said. I know, I whispered. Me neither. We walked away from the festival, away from the lights, into the quiet night. And there, beneath a willow tree that swayed like it, too, was caught in some unspoken sadness, he pulled me into his arms. We kissed, slowly, deeply, as if trying to press time to a stop. His hands on my back, my fingers in his hair, the whole world narrowed to this one point, us. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. Neither of us said anything. Because there was nothing to say. We already knew what was coming. But for now, for just a little longer, we still had this summer. The end came quietly. No thunder. No slamming doors. No dramatic rainstorms or tearful breakdowns. Just a sentence over dinner, spoken too casually to match its weight. "We'll be returning to London at the end of the month," my father said, cutting into his fish. Just like that. I stared at my plate, suddenly aware of the sound of the cicadas outside. They didn't stop. They didn't care. Later that night, I stood barefoot on the wooden porch, looking out at the tea garden. My fingers gripped the rail so tightly my knuckles turned white. How do you prepare to lose the one thing that made a place feel like home? The next day, I found Haru waiting beneath the plum tree where we always met. He saw my face and didn't ask anything. He simply stepped forward, his arms open. I buried my face in his chest, breathing him in ink and pine and summer. "I have to go," I whispered. He didn't move. Didn't speak. "I don't want to," I added, my voice cracking for the first time. After a long moment, I felt his hand come up to rest lightly on my back. "I know," he said softly. "It's okay." But it wasn't. I tried everything. I begged my father to let me stay until the end of the season. I told him I could continue lessons remotely, that this experience was more valuable than anything in a classroom. He listened patiently, kindly, even, but shook his head. "There are responsibilities waiting back home," he said quietly. "It's time." I looked at him, searching for softness. "But there's no one there." He avoided my gaze. My mother had died when I was 10. Since then, home had been wherever my father's work took us. But Japan had felt different. For the first time in years, I had something that felt like mine. But time didn't feel real anymore. It felt like something broken. Like a clock that had been counting down behind our backs without mercy. The days after that passed like a dream I couldn't hold on to. Haru and I didn't speak about the end. We simply lived in the moments we had left. We sat longer in the garden. Walked slower along the sea. We didn't draw anymore. What was the point? Every picture would be a goodbye. Our final evening came too soon. The sun hung low, golden and full, stretching our shadows long across the path as we walked one last time to the tea garden. He had brought a blanket, and we sat beneath the old tree where we had first met. It was blooming now, small white petals drifting down like snow. He took something from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. A folded piece of paper. I opened it carefully. It was a drawing. Of me. Sitting in the garden, hair loose, eyes turned up toward the light. The detail was breathtaking, every line full of care, of memory. "I wanted to remember you," he said. I reached out and touched his face. "I'll never forget you." He smiled. That same soft, thoughtful smile that had undone me since the first day. "Promise?" he asked. "I promise," I said. And then I leaned in, and we kissed, not like before, not full of longing and ache, but quietly, gratefully, as if saying thank you. We didn't cry. Not then. We just sat there until the light was gone and the lanterns around the house began to glow. And then, slowly, I stood. He walked me back to the gate. There, beneath the wooden arch that marked the entrance to the garden, we stood for the last time. "I'm glad it was you," I whispered. He reached out, brushing my hair behind my ear once more. "Be happy," he said. I nodded, unable to speak. And then I walked away. I didn't look back. Because I knew that if I did, I wouldn't be able to keep going. The next morning, I sat beside my father in the back seat of the black car as we drove through the village one last time. Everything looked smaller, quieter, as if the whole place knew. As we turned the corner past the tea house, I glanced out the window. There, standing beneath the plum tree, was Haru. His hands in his pockets. His face calm, unreadable. He didn't wave. But he was there. And that was enough. Years later, I would find that drawing again, folded carefully between the pages of a book I'd almost forgotten. And when I opened it, I'd remember everything, the scent of summer, the warmth of his hand in mine, the way the lanterns lit up the night like floating stars. And I would whisper to the paper, to the memory, to the boy with ink-stained hands. I didn't forget. I never went back to Japan. Not because I didn't want to, I did. But life has a way of pulling you forward, whether you're ready or not. We returned to London in late September. The sky was already grey, the air full of fog and hurried footsteps. Everything felt loud, fast, heavy. And I felt hollow. I didn't speak much those first weeks. My friends, those who had waited politely for my return, didn't ask many questions. What could I tell them? That my heart was still sitting under a blooming tree half a world away? At night, I would dream in color, soft pinks, deep greens, the gold of sunset on his skin. And I would wake up to gray. Time passed. It always does. I finished school. Went to university. Studied art history, though I never painted again. I married a kind man. Solid, gentle. He made me laugh. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. There was love. A different kind. Quieter. Grounded. But sometimes, when the children were asleep and the house was still, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and let my mind wander. I never told my husband about Haru. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because some things live in a place too tender for explanation. There were moments, over the years, when Japan would return to me without warning. The smell of pine in winter. The hush of snow falling on a quiet street. The soft creak of old wooden floors. Once, at a museum, I saw a painting, a simple inkwash of a plum tree on rice paper. My chest tightened so suddenly I had to sit down. It never left me, that summer. It settled somewhere deep. Not like a wound, but like a second heart, one that beat only for memory. People always asked why I never visited Japan again. Didn't you live there once? Yes, I would say. A long time ago. Wouldn't you like to go back? And I'd smile. Maybe nod. But the truth is, I couldn't. I was afraid. Afraid to see what had changed. Afraid to find the garden gone, the house replaced. Afraid that I'd walk those streets and not feel him anymore. Afraid, perhaps, that I would. One autumn, many years later, I found an old box tucked high in the closet. Inside were scraps of drawings, pressed flowers, a folded paper crane. And at the bottom, the tiny pendant he had given me. The one shaped like a flying crane, smooth and cool to the touch. I held it for a long time. My children grew up. Left home. My husband passed, quietly, in his sleep one October night. And still, some evenings, I would sit by the window and remember. Not sadly. Not always. Just, gently. I never saw Haru again. I don't know where life took him, if he ever left the village, if he married, if he had children of his own. But sometimes, I wonder. When he walked past the plum tree in spring, did he remember me too? Did he still draw? Did he ever whisper my name into the breeze, the way I sometimes whispered his into the night? People often say that love must last forever to be real. But I've never believed that. Some love stays, not in time, but in the soul. It becomes part of you. A quiet thread woven through everything you are. Mine began one summer. In a garden filled with paper lanterns, the scent of ink, and laughter that needed no words. And though the days passed, and the seasons changed, that love never left. It lives with me still. In the way I see the world. In the stillness between moments. In the corner of my smile when I remember. As long as I live, so will he. In the spaces of my heart no one else can reach. And that is more than enough.